Today, our mini-series takes us to Idaho, where the Snake River killer got away with murder. But before we get started, welcome to True Crime with Maneater. If you love all things true crime, including missing person cases, cold cases, and just as strange happenings in the world, you've come to the right place. If you'd like to support the channel, be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss a video upload. Let's get started. The Snake River is a major river of the greater Pacific Northwest region in the U.S. It is over 1,000 miles long, and it rises in western Wyoming, flows through the Snake River Plain of southern Idaho, the rugged Hells Canyon on the Oregon-Idaho border, the rolling Palusa Hills of Washington, and then empties into the Columbian River of eastern Washington. The Snake River drainage bases encompass parts of 6 U.S. states, which is Idaho, Washington, Oregon, Utah, Nevada, and Wyoming. And although Snake River is known for its beauty and its quiet atmosphere away from the city, it was also home to an unidentified serial killer known as the Snake River Killer. In April of 1979, 12-year-old Christina Lee White vanished from Assateague, Washington. The 12-year-old was 5'4" and 135 pounds. She had brown hair and brown eyes and loved being outdoors. She was also heavily involved with her church. Her family would describe the 7th grader as hyperactive and lively. On the Saturday that she was last seen, she was incredibly excited to attend the annual county fair that had rolled into town. On that Saturday, she got dressed in her blue jeans and her red leather sneakers and a pink striped shirt and made her way to the county fair. But around 2:30 p.m. that day, she called her mother and told her that she was not feeling well, and she asked if she would come pick her up. In the past, her mother knew that she was prone to heat stroke, so she instructed her to get a cold cloth and put it around her neck. She also told her to wait at the bottom of the hill because she was going to come get her. It appears that Kristina hopped on her bike and rode to a friend's home. There, she asked for a wet washcloth to cool herself off with. That friend would later tell police that he was in his backyard washing his dogs and did not see Kristina when she arrived. But his stepfather had been home, and he did help Kristina. He gave her a wet washcloth to apply around her neck. He said that after he gave her the washcloth, he sent her on her way. At this time, Kristina's mother is anxiously waiting for Kristina at the bottom of the hill. And when she wasn't coming, she began to look for her because she was terrified that perhaps Kristina may have gotten really ill and passed out. Maybe she was on the way to the hospital. All of these thoughts are running through her mind at this point. After frantically looking for her daughter and not getting anywhere, her and her husband contact the police. And Kristina's father immediately suspects the carnival workers as having something to do with her disappearance. Police would search the fairgrounds and question every employee, but they found no evidence of their involvement in the disappearance. But that didn't stop her father. In fact, he would follow them town to town for several days, making sure that they didn't have his daughter. Unfortunately, Christina White is still missing, and although her family believes she is dead, her body has never been found. In June of 1981, 22-year-old Kristin David, a college student, was riding her bike from Moscow, Idaho to Lewiston, Idaho, and she would vanish. 8 days later, her dismembered remains were found in a garbage bag by fishermen along the shore of nearby Snake River. Kristin was an avid bike rider, and she was last seen on Friday, June 26, 1981, riding her bicycle from Moscow to her summer job at the Twin City food plant. Although it was a long ride, it was completely normal for Kristin to do this. Eventually, a witness would claim that she saw Kristin going down a hill into Lewiston the day she disappeared, and another witness would come forward claiming that she saw Kristin talking to someone in a brown van that stopped along the highway to, quote, assist a young woman on the side of the road. Several days later, 2 fishermen near the Red Wolf Crossing Bridge in Lewiston were on their boat when they noticed a black plastic garbage bag bobbing in the water near the North Shore. So they would grab the bag out of the water, open it, and realized that a woman's torso and leg were inside. They didn't have a radio on board, so they found another boat and asked them to call police. The police would arrive and search downriver from the bridge and find more bags containing human body parts. And they were all within 300 yards from where the fishermen found the first bag. Police would say that Red Wolf Crossing Bridge was a long, isolated bridge with a clear, flat view of the roads leading to and from the structure, and summarized that the killer dumped the bags from atop the bridge. And they said it likely happened in the middle of the night or early morning hours. The crime lab would conclude that the body belonged to 22-year-old Kristin David. At this point, the community is in uproar. Something was happening, and even more strange was the rumor that was circulating. Was one of the fishermen who discovered Kristin's body the same man who last saw Kristina before she disappeared 2 years earlier? The community seemed to think so. And then And then suddenly there was a triple disappearance in a single night. On the night of September 12th, 1982, 3 youth would disappear. Stephen Pearsall was said to be a homebody who loved to make others happy. He was a talented artist who specialized in drawing cartoons, and his sister would go on to say he was a very good artist, and so he would draw pages of cartoons to try to cheer you up. Or he'd make a cartoon of you and draw things of you as a cartoon. He was always trying to make people happy. But the 35-year-old would disappear without a trace. His sister would say, "I just remember being heartbroken and seeing my dad heartbroken. He would search every day. He would get in his car and drive and search in ravines and ask people if they've seen anything or heard anything." On the night that he went missing, Stephen had been working at the Lewiston Civic Theater. Prior to that, he had gone to a retirement party before being dropped off at the theater so he could use the laundry machines and practice his clarinet. He was dropped off at around 12:15 a.m. and the theater was completely dark. His girlfriend would watch as Stephen unlocked the door, entered the theater, and turned on a light. But after that, no one seems to know what happened to him. Of course, police would begin their investigation, and in the theater, they would find his clarinet, but his laundry seemed to be missing. They would go to his apartment and find that nothing was in disarray, and it didn't look like he was planning to move or run out of town or any of that. On the same day that 35-year-old Stephen Pearsall disappeared, 2 sisters would also disappear. Stepsisters Jacqueline Miller, who was 18, and Kristina Nelson, who was 21, seemed to have vanished after leaving Jacqueline's apartment. The thing is, they were walking to a grocery store that was nearby the Lewiston Civic Theater, and these 2 women had both worked there. Kristina Nelson would leave a note for her boyfriend, just letting him know that they would be home soon. Her boyfriend would wait all night for Kristina to return, but unfortunately she didn't. As police are tracing these 2 women's last steps, they realized that their trip led them right past the Lewiston Civic Theater, and suddenly they had a strong suspicion that the 2 women entered the theater that night, either on their way to the grocery store or on their way home from the grocery store. On March 19, 1984, 14-year-old Marvin Mead was collecting cans along Idaho Highway. As he's walking back toward the highway, a tree branch would knock the hat from his head. The hat would fall down into a ravine about 50 feet off the highway. So he goes down to retrieve it, and he notices what he thinks is a deer skull. So he goes to pick it up, and then he realizes this isn't a deer, it's a human skull. 2 bodies were found at this location, and they are eventually identified as Kristina Nelson and Jacqueline Miller. It had been over a year since they disappeared. Police believe that the killer may have dumped the bodies nearer to the road, but would later return to move them further down the steep embankment. It was rumored that both bodies had been tied together, and police would acknowledge that rope was found at the scene. That rope used to tie them together was traced to rope used on a ship prop at the Lewiston Civic Theater. With this new evidence, police went back to the theater, and this time they brought luminol, and they wanted to test for the presence of blood, but their tests would be inconclusive. Police did have a suspect in mind, and this suspect was 35-year-old Stephen Pearsall. He had gone missing the same night as the 2 young women. Police did theorize that the 2 young women saw the light on and went into the theater. The thing is, if Stephen had killed these 2 women and disappeared, it seemed that he left everything behind. He left his vehicle, uncashed paychecks, and his girlfriend would even tell them that nothing about Stephen made her believe he would do something like that. He was soft-spoken and kind-hearted. It just didn't add up. Then it appears police discovered another man had been present at that theater the night that Kristina and Jackie disappeared. And it appears it was the same man who had last seen Kristina alive 2 years earlier. They soon believed that Stephen had simply been at the wrong place at the wrong time. The person of interest turned out to be Lance Voss, and it turns out police believe that they were 99% sure that they had the right person. 36-year-old Lance Jeffrey Voss was a longtime resident of the area. Lance Voss was born in 1947, and he was the only son of Frank Voss and his mother Jane Voss. But his father would die in Seattle, Washington, when Lance was just a toddler, but he did spend his early years growing up in Chicago. Lance wasn't a small man by any means. He stood at 6'4" and weighed 200 pounds, but he was described as super friendly and very strong. But others would describe Lance Voss, his wife and stepson, as being very eccentric, weird, and a little bit creepy. The thing is, as of 2014, Lance is alive and living in North Carolina, and many people wonder if he's a serial killer who got away with murder. During the search for Kristina, police and family members would recall that Lance Voss approached them and offered to assist in the search. This struck law enforcement as odd, and not because he offered to help search, but mostly because he continued to suggest, apparently very excitedly, that they search in specific areas. And these areas seemed to lead police in a different direction. A local patrolman would recall that years later, Lance Voss had approached him while he was on the street and began a casual conversation by asking questions about the police's progress on these cases. And the officer would just later recall how odd and suspicious he thought the entire encounter was. And family members would recall that Lance Voss showed up with a wet towel wrapped around his neck at community search party events that offered assistance in the search for young victims' bodies. As for Kristen, who was riding her bike on the day she went missing, witnesses put her last location near Lewiston, which happens to be the serial killer's primary area of operation. It turns out that the route she took wasn't just well known to her. It apparently was well known to Lance Voss as well. Lance Voss's job at the time, he was a delivery man, required regular deliveries between Moscow and the known location where Kristen was last seen. And even more alarming, investigators would realize that Kristen and Lance had something else in common. They had both been affiliated with the Lewiston Civic Theater. Kristen had wanted to go into TV production, so she had been employed for some time at the theater. And it turns out that she was acquainted personally with Lance Voss because of the theater. But the one witness did claim that there was a brown van at the scene, and it turns out that Lance didn't own one at the time. So what about the 3 missing people in one night? Lance Voss would tell police that not only had he seen Steven the night that he vanished, he had worked with him all day building a ship prop for an upcoming show. Lance apparently spent a lot of time at the theater working as an actor, set builder, and horn player. He would tell police that Steven had left the theater around 9 p.m. to go to a party. Lance would also say that he left the theater around 9:30 to go and get some pizza. After getting pizza, he would return to the theater around 10 p.m. But when he arrived at the theater, he lay down on a sofa in the green room to rest. And he said that he slept from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. the next morning in the theater. But 3 people are believed to have entered that theater that night. And it appears that Steven and Lance had a close personal relationship. But the thing is, Steven was still missing. They didn't find him, so they couldn't actually rule him out as a suspect. They did take DNA from Steven's father in hopes that when they find his body, they can identify him. But there really is little information about the investigation. At one point, Lance Voss was asked to take a polygraph, but he refused to do so, and he claimed that an attorney had instructed him to not talk to the police any further. But police would say that voice stress analysis conducted during questioning showed some deception. What I think is crazy about this case, and what many people I think would agree about, is there's just so much circumstantial evidence in this case. And that circumstantial evidence really points towards one person, Lance Voss. But it appears that's not enough. I assume that they didn't have DNA from the bodies they did find. I mean, I'm kind of surprised that they didn't, search his house when Kristina disappeared. I think a lot was missed in this investigation as to when they're collecting evidence and things like that. If all of this stuff is true, this man inserted himself into a police investigation when a little girl is missing, and he's trying to lead them away from where they think they should be investigating. That's a red flag in itself. If he's fishing and he's the person that pulls garbage bags of body parts out of the river, and he has a personal connection with every single one of these victims, it seems like maybe they'd want to hone in more on that, especially during the investigation. Years have passed now, so of course investigations can be solved, but it's frequently much more challenging to do so. But I'd love to know your thoughts on this case. Was Lance Voss a serial killer that was never caught and just roaming free? Or is there another serial killer out there? But that's it for today, guys. If you like this video and want to support the channel, be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss a video upload. If there's a case you'd like me to cover, pop in the comments below and I'll be sure to get to it. In the meantime, check out some other videos on my channel while you wait for the next upload, and I'll see you then.